From the very beginning of our lives, we are taught to believe that change must be massive, dramatic, and almost impossible to achieve, that transformation only comes when we move mountains, quit everything, or reinvent ourselves completely. And yet the truth is so much simpler, so much gentler, so much more surprising. Sometimes, it is not the huge steps that change everything, but one tiny shift in the way we think. A shift so small that it might seem insignificant at first, but so powerful that it unlocks doors we never even noticed were there. And when this realization first entered my life, I could hardly believe the immediate and almost magical effect it had, because it was as if the walls around me melted, as if hidden paths suddenly appeared, as if opportunities that were always there but invisible to me suddenly revealed themselves. And I began to understand that perception is not just passive observation, but the very key that shapes the reality we experience. And that by shifting the lens of thought just slightly, everything around us reorganizes into a new pattern, like a kaleidoscope turning a fraction of an inch and producing an entirely new image. And to tell this story is to tell not just my story, but a universal story. For everyone at some point has felt trapped, stuck, repeating the same cycles, facing locked doors in career, relationships, health, or inner life. And yet, what if those doors were never truly locked, but only unseen, hidden behind the fog of our assumptions, beliefs, and habitual ways of thinking? And what if the key to opening them was not out there in the world, but within the smallest shift of our own mind, the tiniest movements in perspective that align us with new realities, new chances, new possibilities? And this is the power of the tiny shift, so simple yet so profound. And as we begin to explore it, we discover that the human mind is not a rigid machine, but a dynamic living system, constantly filtering, selecting, and interpreting reality based on patterns of thought. And most of the time we live in autopilot, repeating the same interpretations, reinforcing the same beliefs, drawing the same conclusions. And in doing so, we see only the same limited world. But when we make even the smallest adjustment, we alter the filter itself, and suddenly a wider horizon appears. And what was once impossible now becomes possible, not because the external world changed instantly, but because our awareness shifted enough to reveal what was already available, waiting patiently behind the veil. And this is why some people can walk into the same room, the same situation, the same challenge, and yet one sees only obstacles while the other sees opportunities. For it is not the room that changes, but the lens through which they see it. And once we realize this, we stop underestimating the quiet, subtle power of a single thought, a single reframe, a single shift, for it is in that small shift that entire destinies can pivot. And to explain this clearly, let me take you deeper into how my own journey unfolded, how I was stuck in a pattern that felt unbreakable, doors closed everywhere I turned, and how one tiny shift of thinking opened doors I never even saw before, doors that led to new work, new connections, new levels of inner peace, and most importantly, a new way of seeing myself. And it began, as so many turning points do, in a moment of frustration, when I had been chasing solutions the hard way, pushing, forcing, exhausting myself with the belief that only massive action could change things. And yet the more I pushed, the more the walls seemed to close in, until I reached a point of surrender. And in that surrender, I asked myself a new kind of question, not why is this happening to me, but what else could this mean? And in that instant, the tiniest shift occurred, because instead of seeing myself as a victim of circumstances, I saw myself as a participant in a larger unfolding. Instead of focusing on lack, I began to focus on hidden possibility. And instantly, it was as if light shone into a dark room, revealing doors I had overlooked, connections I had ignored, opportunities one had dismissed. And this taught me something vital, that the brain is like a spotlight, and wherever it shines, that becomes our reality. But by shifting where the spotlight falls, we change what exists for us. And this is not mystical wishful thinking, but the very structure of perception and attention itself, proven by countless studies in psychology and neuroscience, showing how the brain filters billions of inputs down to what it believes is relevant, and how those filters are built from our thoughts and beliefs. So when we make a small shift, we are literally reprogramming what our brain allows us to see. And so the world seems to transform, though it was always waiting there beyond the filter. And the question then becomes, how do we practice these tiny shifts? How do we open more doors? And the answer lies not in grandiose leaps, but in daily reframes, in small moments of awareness, in catching ourselves when we fall into the same narrow thoughts and asking, what else is possible? What if this challenge is an invitation? What if this closed door is directing me to another opening? What if this ending is the start of something new? And when we practice this consistently, the brain begins to build new pathways, new connections, new defaults, so that possibility becomes a norm instead of limitation. And the more we shift, the more doors appear. And soon life becomes not a prison but a labyrinth of infinite openings, each leading to discoveries we never imagined. And yet the beauty of it all is that it begins with just one tiny shift, one single thought that reframes a story. And to understand the depth of this, imagine a person staring at a locked door, convinced it is the only way forward, frustrated, angry, hopeless. And yet if they only turned their head slightly, they would see another door wide open just a few steps away. And this is a nature of perception. This is a nature of thought. And this is why transformation can feel so sudden, so miraculous, because the doors were always there, but invisible until the shift occurred. And this is what I mean when I say one tiny shift in thinking instantly opened doors I never saw before. Because in that moment, the world itself rearranged. Not literally, but perceptually, and perception is everything. Because how we see determines what we can do, what we can feel, what we can create. And so, this is not just a story about me, but a universal truth. One that anyone can test for themselves, and in the rest of this journey we'll go even deeper, exploring not just one story, but the layers of science, philosophy, and lived experience that show how tiny shifts in thinking change everything, how history itself is full of people who saw what others could not, how creativity, healing, and breakthroughs come not from massive leaps, but from subtle reframes, and how you, too, right now, can practice shifting, can discover doors in your own life that were waiting for you to notice. And as we move forward, we will see that this is not a one-time miracle, but a way of living, a way of engaging with reality, a way of transforming challenges into openings and obstacles into invitations. But before we step into those wider territories, I want you to feel the raw power of this truth. The doors of your life are already here, some wide open, some hidden, some waiting just beyond the corner of your current perception. And the key to finding them is not force, not struggle, not despair, but a willingness to shift even the tiniest bit in how you think. For that tiny shift will change what you see, and what you see will change everything. When I began to truly live with this awareness, the realization that a single shift in thinking could unlock entire landscapes of possibility, life stopped feeling like a series of random closed doors and started to feel like a vast hallway filled with opportunities, each one leading to experiences, people, and outcomes that had been invisible before. And it was in this stage that I began to experiment deliberately with shifting my thoughts, to treat my mind like a lens I could adjust rather than a fixed reality I was forced to endure. And the results were astonishing because I discovered that what had once seemed impossible was simply a matter of angle, perspective, and interpretation. And with every small reframe, another door opened, another chance revealed itself, another piece of the puzzle fell into place. And the more I leaned into this practice, the more evidence I saw that life itself was conspiring to meet me at the level of my perception. For it was never the case that doors appeared out of thin air, but rather that they were revealed by the willingness to see differently, to think differently, to step out of the narrow hallway of conditioned thought and into the expansive world of possibility. And this truth became so clear to me that I began to look back on all the times in my past when I felt trapped, all the nights spent worrying, all the days consumed with doubt. And I realized that the walls that had once imprisoned me were made not of concrete, but of belief, not of reality, but of assumption. And those assumptions were not facts, but habits of thinking. And the moment one habit shifted, even slightly, I could step into another level of reality. And this realization brought both awe and humility, because I understood that so much of my suffering was self-imposed through narrow thinking. And yet I also understood that freedom was always available through openness, through curiosity, through willingness to adjust a lens of thought. And so I began to ask myself better questions each day, not the questions of despair, but the questions of discovery. Questions like, what am I not seeing here? What opportunity is hiding in this challenge? What possibility is waiting if I shift the way I look at this? And with each question, more doors revealed themselves, and I began to understand that the most powerful shifts often come not from answers, but from the courage to ask new questions. Because a question itself is a shift. A question redirects the spotlight of the mind, and wherever that spotlight shines, new aspects of reality come into view. And so the art of living became for me the art of shifting, the art of asking, the art turned the kaleidoscope 1 degree at a time until an entirely new image emerged. And this is why I say one tiny shift opened doors I never saw before. Because the doors were always there, but my thinking had locked me out, and once I shifted, they opened instantly. And with this understanding, I began to look at history, at science, at human achievement, and I saw the same principle everywhere. Because every breakthrough, every invention, every discovery was a result of someone seeing differently, someone asking a new question, someone making a tiny shift in the way they interpreted reality. And then doors of innovation opened that changed the world. And so this is not just a personal truth, but a universal law that life responds to the shifts of perception, that the external world reorganizes itself in alignment with the internal lens. And as I embrace this law, I noticed even in the small details of daily life how powerful it was. For example, when I once faced a difficult conversation with someone I loved, my first thought was resistance, defensiveness, fear, and in that state the door to connection felt closed. But when I shifted my thought from fear to curiosity, from defensiveness to openness, instantly the conversation transformed. The door to understanding opened, and what could have become a conflict became a bridge. And I realized again how many doors remain unseen simply because of the stance of our mind. And this made me wonder how many opportunities humanity misses collectively because of our unwillingness to shift, because of our insistence on fixed positions, rigid beliefs, and narrow stories. And yet the beauty of the tiny shift is that it does not require massive effort. It does not require the world to change first. It requires only the courage to look differently, to choose another interpretation. And once that choice is made, the ripple effects extend outward into every interaction, every decision, every possibility. And in this way, the tiniest shift can create the largest transformation, like a seed becoming a tree, like a spark igniting a fire, like a single thought altering the trajectory of a lifetime. And so I began to cultivate this practice more consciously, to wake up each morning and remind myself that the way I think is the doorway I walk through, that if I want new doors, I must be willing to think new thoughts, to shift even slightly away from limitation and toward expansion. And this became not just a personal practice, but philosophy of life, one I share with others. And I saw the same truth in their lives too. For when they shifted, doors opened, and when they resisted, the doors remained hidden. And slowly a community of people began to form around this idea, each one discovering in their own way the freedom of shifting, the liberation of seeing what was always there. And together we created stories, shared insights, lived experiences of transformation, all confirming again and again that the power of change is not distant, not difficult, not unreachable, but right here in the smallest movement of the mind. And the more I immersed myself in this practice, the more grateful I became, because I understood that I no longer needed to wait for miracles. I no longer needed to beg for doors to open. I simply needed to shift and see, and the doors would reveal themselves. And this gave me a new sense of empowerment, a new sense of peace, and most importantly, a new sense of trust in the unfolding of life. Because even when I face closed doors now, I know they're not the end. I know there are others nearby, waiting to be seen, and this trust has changed everything. Because fear no longer dominates. Despair no longer blinds me. Instead, curiosity leads me. Openness guides me, and gratitude anchors me. And this is a life of open doors, a life that anyone can live, not because they control the world, but because they can always shift the way they see. And in that shift, the world they experience transforms. And so my story becomes your story, and your story becomes ours. And together we discover that there is no final wall, no ultimate prison, only doors waiting for the right shift to reveal them. And once we know this, we can live with courage, with wonder, with the unshakable faith that life is infinitely abundant, infinitely generous, infinitely open, and that one tiny shift in thinking can and will open doors we never saw before, doors that will keep opening as long as we are willing to look, willing to shift, willing to believe that possibility is always here, always closer than we think, always waiting for us to turn the key of perception and step through into the infinite unfolding that is our true life.